Let me start off on the security piece. What can you tell us about what possibly could have happened to have led to this? Many are calling this really a security intelligence failure for the ages.
Thanks so much for having me. Look, I think as Daniel pointed out correctly, we don't quite know yet. Clearly, this was an intelligence failure. This was also a security failure. Having those types of investigations take some time, and I'm sure Israel, the U.S. allies will go back after the war is completed, after this conflict is over, and try to figure out exactly how they missed such a huge operation, really a generational operation, something we've never seen before. But we're just not there yet, and I don't think any energy is being put against it, nor should it.
I thought it was quite interesting, though, that perhaps it wasn't only just an issue of intelligence and interpreting information, but an issue, as the comparisons being made of 9/11, of imagination. So just as America's perhaps never imagined that Muslim fundamentalists of Al-Qaeda would fly planes into buildings, perhaps here we had analysts that didn't appreciate the sort of, plans with paragliders, through barricaded compounds of Gaza that we saw. Do you think that is a possibility in terms of how this has managed to be able to happen?
I think that it's certainly true that over the last few decades, especially as the security barriers have been built in the West Bank, as Gaza was disengaged from in '05, and then security barriers there were built, there was a view that Israel probably got complacent, that it was comfortable, that I think this was hard to imagine this happening. There was a huge amount of creativity went into this, a huge amount of planning. This was not something that Hamas decided to do overnight. There was almost certainly months of preparation, months of planning that went into this. And I think that obviously paid off. The complexity of this attack from Hamas's perspective was not only incredibly successful, but it was incredibly impressive. And I think U.S. officials, Israeli officials, are going to have to really re-examine some of their base assumptions going forward.
If most of this attack happened towards the south of Israel, what's the potential of a multi-front war at this point?
It's a great question. I think it's the big one that folks in Israel are struggling with right now. It's certainly very, very possible for Hezbollah to decide that it's going to get involved from not only the north, but Hezbollah has an inventory and capabilities that are much greater than Hamas's that can really strike, frankly, most of Israel. Certainly Tel Aviv, certainly Haifa, certainly Jerusalem, the major cities, but also Palestinian militants in the West Bank, whether or not they would get involved. I think some of it is really going to be dependent on what happens next. In 2006, during that war, you may remember Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier, was kidnapped by Hamas, but Hezbollah didn't immediately get involved. It actually was just as the ground war was getting going and some of the fighting was really getting spun up between Israel and Hamas that Hezbollah also entered. If Hezbollah believes that Hamas really could be at risk, that the Israeli war planning is so intense that it could really decapitate Hamas and really, really set back the organization or undermine the organization in such a fundamental way that they couldn't be a valuable partner, then I think you very well might see Hezbollah get involved, and then you have a multi-front war like Israel's never seen before.
According to senior members of Hezbollah and Hamas speaking to the Wall Street Journal, apparently Iranian security officials helped supposedly this Hamas attack. If this turns to be true, what are the implications in terms of an actual direct Iran-Israel war?
I think that's certainly a important question, and one that I think is still being considered. This report just broke. I haven't seen corroboration from any other newspapers yet. Doesn't mean it's not coming. Look, in some ways, it really shouldn't matter if Iran played a direct role when it came to planning this attack. The reality is the overwhelming majority of Hamas's money, their weapons, come from Iran. And more importantly, frankly, Iran would have had to give some sort of acquiescence for this to happen. If they turned out to have a direct role in it, then I think Israel is certainly going to take that into consideration, and the U.S. will need to as well. But there's been a shadow war going on for years now. In the cyber realm, certainly we've seen that, covert assassinations that have been ascribed to Israel. So this may be bringing it into a more overt public manner, but it doesn't actually, I think, fundamentally change how we should view what is an Iran-Israel conflict.
At least does it fundamentally change Israel's military strategy from here?
It could, but again, we alluded to the multi-front war earlier. I think there's a real question, how many fronts can Israel fight on alone? I think it will change Israel's strategy, probably most dependent on whether or not it feels secure and it can quickly accomplish the objectives it sets vis-a-vis Hamas and vis-a-vis Hezbollah. If Hezbollah gets involved, Iranian militants in Syria get involved, if West Bank militants get involved. It's hard to imagine an immediate direct strike on Iran right now by Israel. I can't say that's not possible, but there's so many fronts Israel has to fight on. I think the bigger question will be, what response does the U.S. take, and how does it change the U.S. calculus vis-a-vis Iran and its support of Israel?